Okay, it's good to be back. I'm going to talk a little bit because I have one more slide that I wanted to put in here, but I don't think I'm going to get it done. So I'll just tell you what it looks like. So it was great to be. It's great to be back. It was great to be away. We had a great time in England, speaking at the Moriel conference. The video of that I don't believe is up yet. It should be up sometime in the near future. You can look at Moriel TV. Of course, I did the prophecy update. I recorded the slides and put that up last week, and a version of that might be up sometime in the future also. It was very encouraging. I spent several days up in what they call Derbyshire, uh, Derby, Swanwick. Great people. It was very encouraging. There were several hundred fellow believers there. Came from all different kinds of backgrounds and walks of life and everything, and it was very encouraging to see all those people in one place. Now, unfortunately, and Jacob kind of reminded me about this, is that it kind of um, it kind of gives you a little distorted view when you go someplace like England or the UK and you see believers. That's all you see for a few days, and you sort of think, well, gee, this is such a great country and everything is just absolutely fine here. But there are a lot of problems in England, um, trust me. And then we spent a few days in London and had a great time going to see some of the places like the British Museum, British Library. But there is, every place we went, if there was a guide, there was usually a very dark, vicious, brutal story to tell about the place. And you have to admire the Englishmen. They are very optimistic. They've been living there for a couple thousand years, and they think the weather is going to improve sometime. It's hard to imagine. They're about as far north as the southern end of Hudson Bay. Their climate is moderated by the Gulf Stream. They have a long, long history. There's Roman ruins. The Romans were there. Hadrian's Wall there up between what's England and Scotland. We went to the British Museum, British Library, where they have some of the most important artifacts that you'll find anywhere. The Magna Carta. They have first edition of the King James Bible right there. And it was kind of an interesting exhibit at the British Library where they have all these historical documents because they have that. They have some of the original uh, Greek manuscripts of the New Testament. By the way, they're in Greek. They're not in King James English, just in case you were wondering about that. They, and so it's in this giant room. But then over in the corner, they have like the original notes of Oscar Wilde's play. Then in the next case, they have some of the Beatles notes and some of the original songs, the actual documents that they wrote their no paper that they wrote their lyrics on. And then they have a very long case of Michael Palin's works and papers from Monty Python. And just across the room is the Magna Carta. So it's very British, I think, in the way they have that organized. We went to the British Museum, and one of the things we wanted to see there at the British Museum was I had talked last Sunday in the update that I did, and I talked a little bit about Shechem. I talked about the Amarna letters, and I thought, wow, that'd be really great to see these in the flesh. And they're of important biblical archaeological finds. If you rank them in the top 10, I would say 3 or 4 of those are actually in the British Museum in London. The Taylor Prism that I referred to before, that talks about Sennacherib getting tribute from Hezekiah, laying siege to Jerusalem, and then going home. Of course, he leaves out the part where 185,000 of his soldiers were slain in one night by the angel of the Lord. But then there's the Amarna letters, which were letters written from the king of Shechem and the king of Egypt about these people in the hill country called the Haparu. Well, it's clear, I think it's pretty clear from the context of what they're referring to. There's people that have kind of come into the nomadic people that have come into the hill country, the mountains of Israel, and they're taking over, and they're setting up farming communities. And of course, Haparu, I think, is just a way they spelled Hebrew. And they were nomadic people. They had wandered where? They had wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. So I wanted to see these letters since I talked about them last Sunday, and we get to the gallery where they are, and it's closed. It's the only gallery in the entire museum that's closed. And I can kind of see them hanging on the wall. They're really not that big. They're maybe they're letters. They look like clay Post-it notes almost. But they eventually opened it after we waited around for an hour or so, and I got to see them. So I'll share more about those in the future. Well, today I want to talk about your canary. I used the canary in the coal mine for a title several years ago. It's my favorite title graphic of all time. So I'm going to trot it out every now and then. I think the last time I used it, I titled it The Canary is Dying. And the canary hasn't really improved if you look at it in terms of Bible prophecy. And you know the story. They took canaries down into the coal mines. And if the canary died, you were going to die soon if you didn't get out of the mine. And in many things, the canary in the coal mine is an analogy. In geopolitics, you could almost say that the Jewish people are the canaries in the coal mine, because usually what happens to them will happen to somebody else in terms of persecution. And that fits very well and squarely with Bible prophecy. It would be nice if the leaders of the world are going to get on a holiday schedule like we have here in the U.S. and kind of back off during holiday weeks so we didn't have so much to talk about. I was sitting on the plane coming back from London to Detroit the other day, and I'm on the internet and I'm working, and praise the Lord. I mean, it's not good for the airline, but it was great for us that I was in the center section and I had the entire row to myself, so I could spread out and plug everything in. And I could work on my update. And it always amazes me. You're flying over the North Atlantic and you have internet, Wi-Fi access. It always amazes me. But again, this was another week where there seemed to be just this tremendous convergence of events. Things are happening. It's a very disruptive world. I'll use this, just the first sentence of this. This know also that in the last days perilous times shall come. And if you divided Bible prophecy into 7 or 10 or 25 or 50 categories, I would say that virtually every one of them is in play right now as we speak. I'm going to talk about a few things. If I remember them today, I didn't even have time to put them into a slide because just so many things happened. It seemed like everything was calm, and then it's like Saturday night, I start checking my news feed and everything seems to be exploding. But these really are perilous times. I'm not even going to talk about the economy. You know, there's a lot of people that think a major economic crash is on the near horizon. Oil prices are collapsing. In the UK, we had people driving us around, or we used cabs, but I did notice the price. It was about £1.40, £1.40 for a liter of gasoline, which translates to somewhere around $7.70 a gallon. And I told them that if you converted I think I saw gas prices today for $2.15 a gallon, which if you convert it to pounds comes out to about $1.65 for a gallon. A pound 65 pence for a gallon. And they're like, what? That's all you pay for gasoline? And it's true. I mean, there are people over there, it's very hard for them to drive this. A lot of them don't drive their cars. In London, a lot of people don't have cars. London is very congested. I posted on my Facebook page, we were walking down to catch the underground, the subway, and I noted that just as we were getting on the street, a Lamborghini pulled up beside us. And we kept ahead of the Lamborghini for 3.5 blocks. And we still had the several $100,000 that it cost him to get a car that was slower than we were. So it made me feel a tad superior just for a moment. Isaiah chapter 5 verse 20 says, "Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter." I'm going to give you a few examples today of how you need to be careful with the news. And it's very easy to fall. I fall into this trap. I've fallen for articles before, or editorial perspectives that have been written into articles that really don't match up with the facts. So when I warn people or I talk about this, I want you to know that I'm subject to falling into the same trap. I'm not perfect. I don't expect other people to be perfect, but we need to be very careful about what we post and share. And so one example of this was an article in The Independent that appeared the other day. This is one of the editorials that appeared. "Ohio's draconian stance on abortion shows us that equality can go backwards." There was also another article in The Independent that claimed that the new Ohio anti-abortion, pro-life law that has been passed by both the House and the Senate, which appears to be with veto-proof majorities. You have to have 60% of the legislature to override a veto. And Kasich, by the way, has said he's going to veto this bill. But The Independent came out and said, and I don't know what happened to him, but that's a subject for another, maybe to talk about over lunch, to lament what happened to what at one time appeared to be a conservative governor who really was pushed to the forefront by his support of pro-life measures, or the pro-life movement. But in The Independent, one of the other articles that they had was, in addition to this editorial, was that women and doctors who performed abortions in Ohio could get the death penalty. Now, I went and I read the bill, and you can go read the bill as well. And there's a big article in the New York Times, which said Ohio House approves measure to restrict abortions, which was much fairer than The Independent, which is a left-leaning newspaper in the UK, had given it. I read through the bill. I do not see in there, maybe I missed it, but I do not see in there where someone who performs an abortion in Ohio after that bill becomes law will be subject to the death penalty. And so it appears to me that The Independent got their news from either they made it up, they got it from a left-wing pro-abortion group that was trying to raise money that said, oh, this is terrible, Ohio's going to put to death women who have abortions. There's a very detailed provision in there about informed consent. You have to tell people what the abortion is, what it will do, the results will be, which is what is required. You know, when you go to have a medical procedure, like I had a knee replacement. So when I went to the knee replacement, I get a big long form, and the doctor comes and he tells me you can get infection, this might not work, you might not have the result that you want, and they make you sign. It's informed consent. They want to be sure that you understand the risk before you have a procedure. But what's happened with abortion is probably the one thing that's been removed from that particular area of the law. They don't want people to know the truth. So the law has a it requires the doctors, before doing an abortion, to see if there's a fetal heartbeat. If there's a fetal heartbeat, they have to explain this to the mother, and then they want to be sure that they get an informed consent. If the abortionist does not do this, he's subject to a penalty. As best as I could find from reading the law, it's a 5th-degree felony, which is the lowest degree of felony in the state of Ohio. A 5th-degree felony is punishable by a fine of, I believe, up to $5,000 or $10,000 and 6 to 12 months in prison. It's not the death penalty, folks. So whatever the Independent said about this was just simply untrue and overstated. So you have to be very careful about that. The reason the law has been set up, and the pro-life movement and the Ohio legislature, both the House and the Senate, have worked very closely with the pro-life movement in Ohio to craft the bill so that they will have a good chance of getting the bill up to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court, it might be a vehicle for the Supreme Court to overrule Roe versus Wade. I think it's a wonderfully drafted bill. I think it's very careful. It's not over the top in any way, unless, of course, you believe that you should be able to abort and kill babies up until the moment that they're actually in the birth canal waiting to be born. So pray about that, but I'm pretty sure that Kasich is going to, at least based on what he said, is he's going to veto that, and then it'll be up to the Ohio House or Senate. I can't remember. I think it originated in the House, so I think the House would have to override the veto with 60%. And I think the vote was 65 to 38 or 34, I think, to approve it. So they have the votes if everybody holds in there to override Kasich's veto. And hopefully Kasich will just go away and let Governor DeWine come in. And I believe Governor DeWine, his new Governor-elect DeWine, has indicated that he would sign the bill. This is always troubling, that what you see going on. This is a tweet from the city of Boulder, Colorado, and it's a picture of drag queen storyline at the Boulder Library, and it says, "Great turnout of families at drag queen storyline at Boulder Library this morning." And you see the picture of young children there and this drag queen telling stories. This is where it's going. This is Days of Lot stuff, and I think I could have 2 or 3 or 4 of these stories every week in my update. On the right is a letter, which I've mentioned previously. Transgender, intersex, and gender nonconforming people won't be erased by pseudoscience. The letter has been signed by people. You have to show you have scientific credentials, a master's or PhD in some science field, although it's pretty loose because sometimes it's applied psychology or applied behavioral science or something like that, not just, and sometimes it's physics, which don't often deal with gender issues or biological issues. But when I first gave this to you a few weeks ago, it had been signed by about 500 or 600 scientists. Now it's up over 2,000, and I expect the number to grow. And we are not yet 4 years past when the same-sex marriage decision came in. So I think what you need to think of is this, how Bible prophecy is happening now, is that we used to be on sort of a line where things were increasing. They were speeding up, but now we've reached that exponential growth where they're just shooting straight up. And I think that's exactly what's happening. And you're going to see this with a lot of different issues that are related to Bible prophecy that the Bible talks about. Artificial intelligence, Israel, geopolitics, et cetera, et cetera. So while we were in England, President Trump put in place an executive order, to overturn aspects of the executive order that President Obama had put in place. Now, everybody agrees, every thinking person, any person who could fog a mirror, you know what I mean? You could put a mirror under their nose and it would actually show that they still had the vapor of life left within them, would understand and would agree, I believe, that what President Obama did had no congressional legislative support. He did not like the law. He wanted to do it for political purposes, so he put in place various things about asylum and the DREAM Act, DACA, and those type of things. And so if the executive order, it's not law. It's not constitutional law. It's what the executive said they were going to do. And the executive has a lot of discretion under our Constitution to enforce laws or not enforce laws. They control the Justice Department and the wheels of justice. But in this case, Obama went beyond the bounds of what Congress had provided, and change things. It's like he did on the sex discrimination. You can't discriminate on the basis of sex. And what Obama did was he put in place regulations that said you can't discriminate. Sex includes sexual preference and sexual identity, gender identity. That's not what the law was enacted to prevent. Look, if you want that, go enact the law. So Trump has come in and tried to overturn some of these things, and he did this with asylum. And of course, the Ninth Circus, as you would more accurately call it, one of the judges came in there and he overturned it and he put in place a nationwide injunction. Now, these nationwide injunctions never existed until about 50 years ago. They were never used. Trump, I think, has had more nationwide injunctions put in place by judges appointed by Obama. I think 100% of those have been by judges appointed by Obama. More than any other president has had to face nationwide injunctions, and all the other presidents combined. It's like, I think the number's up to 22 now. And this is not the way the Constitution is supposed to operate. Now, Trump was very upset. And as he's prone to do, he tweeted about it. And I think he also made some statements in a press conference on the White House lawn about how bad the Ninth Circuit is. So the result of that was that Chief Justice Roberts of the Supreme Court came out and said, oh, the judicial branch is nonpartisan and we're not biased, and I can't believe the president said this. Now listen, this is the same Chief Justice who, when Obama criticized Justice Alito, said nothing. To which the conclusion is, I think Washington, D.C. destroys your brain. There is something in the water, and I'm concerned that Amazon is moving a large part of their operations there, and I'm concerned they're going to messing up my orders. And it takes time to get them unwound. So I'm just telling you. And I'm shocked. I'm frankly shocked at what Roberts did. So listen, if you don't like it, Chief Justice Roberts, resign and let President Trump appoint another Chief Justice. We'll get along fine without you. Look, people criticize judges' opinions all the time. So either toughen your skin up, Chief Justice Roberts, or go work and make millions of dollars working for a big DC law firm. That's just my opinion. And I don't think he can do anything about it anyway. I think it's a travesty what Roberts did. This is another example of the way the news twists everything. So anything to get President Trump, and I always feel like I get up here every Sunday like I'm defending Trump. I'm not necessarily defending everything that President Trump does. I'm just pointing out to you the bias of the news, and so how you have to be careful with it. So Khashoggi was murdered in the Saudi embassy in Istanbul. Body was disposed of somehow. I don't think they've ever found the body. And so now, because Trump has tried to shore up relations with the Saudis, because the Saudis help us oppose Iran, and we consider Iran a bigger problem right now than the Saudis, they're using this Khashoggi, they've turned this Khashoggi guy into a saint. And he was not. He was an Islamist. He was a Muslim Brotherhood supporter. He wasn't a journalist. He was essentially a mouthpiece for various Islamist organizations. But he worked for he wrote periodically for the Washington Post, and so they've turned him into this. And so it was reported earlier this week that the CIA came out with a report and said that Khashoggi's murder had probably been ordered by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. I'm not sure that that's what the CIA report said, but the press, of course, seized on those reports. It was all over the news. Trump came out and said, we're still looking at it. And they're saying, okay, now see, Trump is making every bad person in the world, every dictator in the world is taking a cue from Trump that it's okay to go do whatever you want and the U.S. won't be involved in it at all. And this is just simply, I just don't think this is true. So this is this is what we're faced with, and so this is one example. Trump stands with Saudi Arabia over the murder of Khashoggi. I don't know that that's true. Even the Daily Sabah is a Turkish newspaper. It's essentially a mouthpiece for Erdogan. Erdogan is an Islamist. He is a Muslim Brotherhood guy. He even went, if you might remember, in the early days of the Arab Spring, the Arab revolutions that started back in 2000, well, actually late 2010, he actually went to Egypt, I think, as an inspiration for the Muslim Brotherhood there to take over the government. Now, it took Erdogan over a decade to consolidate his power, and he's been very, very clever the way he's done things. I think the thinking was we could do this more quickly in Egypt. Now, it didn't work. The Muslim Brotherhood revolution there failed. They kicked those guys out, put them in prison. But the Daily Sabah is essentially a mouthpiece for Erdogan. Erdogan is not a supporter of a free press. He has jailed hundreds of journalists. He's jailed hundreds of government officials, military officials, government workers, teachers, that sort of thing that disagree with him. It's in the numbers are in the thousands. And these people have been put in prison and tortured. You saw he kept a American pastor for a couple of years before he finally released him. But what's interesting, and I think even the New York Times and Washington Post both noted this the other day, that Erdogan has used this Khashoggi thing to make himself look like a saint in the Islamic world. And he does have designs on being the new caliph of a revived Ottoman Islamic empire. That's what he wants. That is his goal. And so here are all the American newspapers and press helping him along and saying, even though Erdogan is really not such a nice guy, it's amazing what he's been able to accomplish in a short time and make himself look better. And so here's the headlines. Look at the couple headlines right there. Turkey troubled by U.S. president turning a blind eye to grisly murder of Khashoggi. Boy, is that ever dripping with hypocrisy. And the other one, calls for international investigation into murder of Khashoggi getting louder. And what you've seen over time is you've seen Erdogan continually leak little bits of information to the press to keep everything in the press. They'll leak a little bit of the investigation. We have tapes, we have recordings, etc. And I'm telling you, he's been very, very clever. And I think because of Turkey's prominence in end-time Bible prophecy, I think it's very important that you keep a close eye on what's going on in Turkey. I'm not saying Erdogan is the guy or anything like that, but Turkey is very important and prominent in end times eschatology. So you need to keep look on it. This is another report that's in the Washington Post yesterday. Headline, this is I think from the New York Times, Stone associate is in negotiations with Mueller. And you see from the Washington Post on the left-hand column there, Stone ally in talks for plea deal. Now, who are they talking about? They're talking about Jerome Corsi. Corsi is a conservative. He's 72 years old. He has a YouTube channel. He does sort of traffic in conspiracy theories. He was a big promoter of this QAnon stuff early on. I think he's backed away from that. But this is troubling to me as a lawyer, because I've seen the Department of Justice, and it was the Department of Justice and FBI under Mueller. Mueller was in charge. He became the FBI director shortly after 9/11. And during the 2000s, I've seen this up close and personal, my friends. I know exactly what I'm talking about. So Corsi has a YouTube channel. Corsi knows Roger Stone. Stone was, I think, Trump's campaign manager, and they're trying to tie Stone into the Russians. And then by tying Stone into the Russians, they've tied Trump into the Russians and that sort of thing. So Corsi has been subpoenaed, questioned, and appeared in front of grand jury a number of times. He has now been examined on the record 40 hours. Now, I once had a case involving an insurance agent, and if you're an insurance agent, don't take this personally. Okay, I'm speaking broadly of all insurance agents. As I'm making a generalization. I'm sure there are wonderful insurance agents, but I was representing the insurance company, and the attorney on the other side wanted to take the deposition of a broker who sold an insurance policy and his supervisor, or the agent and the broker. He spent 50 hours deposing those people under oath about, and I told the attorney finally, I just said, frankly, I don't want to spend an hour with an insurance agent sometimes, you know what I mean? And I've sat here for 50 hours and listened to this nonsense. And what happens, any attorney will tell you this, as you question people more and more, they get a bit confused. Jerome Corsi is 72 years old. He was asked these questions, and so now what's happened, he's asked all these questions, they've taken transcripts of everything that he said, and then they've gone back and compared it to emails. And now they're coming to Corsi and say, hey, your emails are inconsistent with what you said in 40 hours of questioning. We're going to charge you with lying or perjury. And so now Corsi, essentially they're trying to get Corsi to shut up. He had a pretty popular YouTube channel. And this is legal bullying in my opinion. And I've seen it happen. It's troubling. I don't think it's right if it's done under a Republican administration, which it was in the cases I'm familiar with. It was done under the Bush administration. And they go in and he's spent tens, and I think Roger Stone indicated he spent $750,000 now on attorney's fees. And we all love attorney's fees in the legal profession, we really do. But they bankrupt people. And eventually they get you to plead guilty to something. If I did that on the other side of a case or in a civil case, I would go to prison, or I'd lose my license to practice law. But prosecutors do it all the time, and especially these special counsel. I just think it's out of control. I think it needs to be stopped, and that's my thinking. Since we were in England, the UK, we saw a lot of British newspapers. By the way, the British newspapers are much more detailed about a lot of things than American newspapers. They really put American newspapers to shame, whether you agree with their editorial perspective or not. Right now, Trump has threatened to release classified materials about the FISA court investigations, or how the FISA court allowed warrants to be issued to tap into, to do surveillance on Trump and Trump Tower and other things associated with the Trump campaign. So Trump has threatened, I'm going to declassify this material. Well, now the British spy network, MI6, they're all upset. This is in the Telegraph the other day. You won't see it in the American press, I'm sure, about they don't want Trump to do this because they're afraid, I think, that it will expose something that they're doing in Great Britain and England. So this is kind of a geopolitical football now, what's going on with regard to the investigation of the Trump administration under Mueller. I think it's something that should be shut down. I mentioned, I think in my update last week, that there had been a barrage of rockets released into, and we're going to talk about Israel and the Middle East for most of the rest of this update. There were a barrage of rockets released from, well, let me back up. Let me do the sequence. There was a operation by the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, to go in and take out or kidnap some of the Hamas military chiefs or the Islamic Jihad chiefs. That operation did not go particularly well. They were found out. There was a bus of soldiers that were coming to supply support. There were 50 soldiers on it. They had just gotten off the bus when it was hit by a missile. If they had been on the bus, they probably all would have been killed. There were only 2 minor injuries that occurred. It was filmed, though. It was clearly done, clearly planned. It was they had somehow figured out that the operation was underway. That then led, within short order, I have that red alert app on my phone that tells when rockets have been fired from Gaza or from Lebanon into Israel. It buzzed for like 20. It kept running my battery down because it was buzzing so often. It was the largest rocket barrage ever from Gaza into Israel. Some of those rockets had special enhanced guidance capabilities. This was very concerning to the Israelis, as you can appreciate. And so here's a little report from ILTV on their Depka file show that they do every Monday about these rockets.
Depka file sources identified the rocket as a Falak 2, with a range of 11 kilometers, manufactured at the Shahid Bagheri Industries complex, which is part of Iran's aerospace industries. The missile is designed to destroy defense systems such as Iron Dome batteries. The Iranian rocket showed its destructive capabilities in Ashkelon, killing a Palestinian worker and injuring 2 women. One of Falak 2's advantages is its mobility, allowing it to be launched from any combat 4x4 vehicle, each which carries 2 rockets. While Islamic Jihad secretly received the weapon 2 years ago, it was only given the green light to use it in the latest Palestinian rocket offensive.
So far we have struck more than 150 military targets, all of them military targets belonging to either the Hamas or the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, again signifying the difference here between what the terrorists do and what we do. They target civilians and we target terrorist activity.
The recent
Okay, so that was a little bit, so those are enhanced rockets, and this is very concerning to Israel because it shows that there have been some involvement of Iranian forces in upgrading the rockets in Gaza, and some of them were manufactured within Gaza. So now the technology has been developed so that these missile factories can do more on site than they used to be. If you take that from Gaza and then put it in Lebanon, you understand why Israel goes in and bombs Iranian bases and that sort of thing in Lebanon and Syria that the Iranians have set up, because they don't want Hezbollah, which has longer range rockets, to get these guidance systems in place, because it essentially puts all of Israel into play in terms of rocket attacks. It's very expensive to defend against these missiles that are used by Iron Dome. I want to say my recollection is that to shoot down one of these incoming rockets costs about $50,000. It's very expensive. It's a very highly complex system. You have to have special rockets, guidance systems, and all that. So it's very concerning to the Israelis and to the IDF and to the Israeli Air Force about these rockets that have been developed and put in place in Gaza, which has been under a blockade for quite some time. It's not easy to get things in and out of there. So I looked around, I thought, I tried to find, here's a few-minute clip of Dr. Mordecai Kedar, who writes for various Israeli publications and think tanks, sort of analyzing the situation in Gaza.
Joining us in the studio is Dr. Mordechai Kedar, Bar-Ilan University professor and an expert on the Arab-Israeli conflict. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
It now seems we have a new major threat along the Gaza border, the Falak 2 missiles. Why is the recent Gaza hostilities the first the public is hearing of it?
Well, these missiles apparently are much more problematic than the missiles which we got used to in the past. They are bigger, they are heavier, but the real problem is that they are more precise. And this combination of weight and being precise makes those missiles a real threat on targets around Gaza. The Gazans, apparently the Islamic Jihad, succeeded to smuggle parts of this missile. Part of this are produced in Gaza. And I think that the Israeli security community should be very worried about these missiles, because if this is the ability of the people in Gaza to develop and to launch such missiles, it means that in a couple of years from today, they might be even more capable, to bring much more damage to Israel. And this has to be taken seriously very well by the Israeli authorities.
Is this what former Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman was referring to when he warned that the threat from Hamas and Islamic Jihad would soon be equal to that of Hezbollah?
Apparently, this is what he meant. Of course, the stockpile of missiles, which those in Gaza have, is much smaller than what they have in Lebanon because of the different arenas. Yet, having precise missiles in Gaza is something which Israel should be very worried of.
Mm-hmm. If these missiles have indeed been in store for the greater part of 2 years, and Israel has been aware of them, why has it not destroyed them?
Well, it could be that the storage is under a hospital or under a school or in other sensitive areas, which actually prevent any attack from Israel's side, because Israel will never attack a hospital or a school in order to get rid of some missiles.
Following the recent confrontation with Gaza and the launch of this new missile, why has Israel so far refrained from retaliating against Iranian targets in the region?
Well, if Israel attacks Iran directly, it will be a regional game changer, because so far this region is characterized by war by proxies. Iran doesn't fight personally on Yemen, they only use the Houthis. Iran doesn't fight in Syria, they fight with militias which they brought. Hezbollah, for example. So this is the rule of the game, and you attack the militias or the proxies. Attacking Iran directly will be totally a different game, and I'm not sure that Israel wants to change the game in such a way only because 1 or 2 missiles were launched against Israel from Gaza.
Is an airstrike on Iranian targets or proxies in Syria even plausible now with the deployment of the S-300 missile systems?
What worries Israel more than the S-300 is actually the Russian reaction, because the Russians today apparently are very reluctant to allow Israel to attack anything in Syria, since the attack which the Syrians knocked down a Russian airplane, and the Russians actually blame Israel for the fact that the Russians knocked down the airplane. And recently, means the recent months, Israel apparently refrains from attacking targets in Syria, targets which otherwise would have been attacked. Apparently, this thing could be changed only by a real good and deep meeting between Netanyahu and Putin, which so far Putin tries to avoid.
Well, that's a very interesting situation. And then there's a report, this is from Haaretz today, a left-leaning Israeli newspaper. And one of the things they talk about is the fact that they are still believed to be IDF soldiers within Gaza that were involved in this operation. Hamas is looking for them. It's still a very volatile situation. What happened in Gaza had a big impact, and it came to the fore earlier this week. Avigdor Lieberman, the defense minister of Israel, resigned. He was given the defense ministry portfolio, as they call it, because his party had a number of seats that needed to be within the coalition. I think it was 5 or 6 seats. I think it's 5 seats. And so he resigned as defense minister because he disagreed with the Gazan operation. And I believe that Lieberman also wanted to force early elections in the parliamentary system that they have in Israel. The coalition had, I think you could see, the coalition had 65. With Lieberman's party withdrawing, there's 120 people in the Knesset. Under the parliamentary system, you have to form a coalition government that has majority control of the parliament. So they had a 65-seat block in the coalition. With Lieberman out, the 4 or 5 seats that he had, it took it down to 61. That means that the government is very close to failing, and which means that there would have to be elections almost immediately, unless Netanyahu could keep his coalition together. One of the other parties that's led by Naftali Bennett, who is the education, I think he's the education minister right now, also threatened to withdraw from the coalition unless Naftali Bennett was appointed as defense minister to replace Lieberman. Netanyahu said, no, I'm going to keep the defense ministry portfolio, and Naftali Bennett eventually backed off. This kind of coincided with the Jerusalem Post diplomatic conference in New York City on Wednesday, where a lot of people spoke. Caroline Glick, Justice Minister Shaked, and Avigdor Lieberman also was one of the speakers, along with some other cabinet ministers. But so Netanyahu survived. He has a razor-thin majority in the Knesset. His government still has the majority control, but there may be a call for early elections. The elections were supposed to take place in the latter part of 2019, and it's a very difficult time. I mean, there's an operation in Gaza. Hamas starts firing rockets at the direction of Iran. Iran gave them permission to use these upgraded rockets, and the Netanyahu government is in a bit of a crisis. I don't think the security situation necessarily in Gaza is horrible or unmanageable, but you don't want Israel doesn't want to fight a two-front war. It's a small country, and it would be very taxing on their military. If they went into a ground invasion in Gaza because of the density of the population, by all estimates, 3,000 to 5,000 IDF soldiers would be killed in such an operation. They would eventually win and take control, but it would come at great cost politically. And when you have a razor-thin majority in the Knesset, so what I'm trying to tell you is everything is very volatile. You see volatility there, and in a few minutes we'll see there's volatility elsewhere. So, of course, one of the Justice Minister Shaked was interviewed at the Jerusalem Post conference about the Trump peace plan. Everybody says the Trump peace plan is coming. We've been hearing this for a year and a half. It keeps getting delayed. Now that the Netanyahu's coalition is in a bit of a precarious position, I personally don't think that you're going to see the peace plan anytime soon. And they asked Justice Minister Shaked, what do you think about that? And here was her response.
President Trump this week is apparently having a final briefing on his the deal of the century, his peace plan that's been worked on for the last couple of years now, it seems, and is ready to be unveiled. What do you expect to happen? Do you know of what's going to be in that plan, and do you think it really can succeed?
No, actually, I don't know what they are planning, and I think that the gap between the Palestinians and the Israelis is much too big in order to be bridged. I think personally it's a waste of time. Although I want peace like anyone else, I'm just more realistic. And I know that in the current future it is impossible. But let's wait and see what they will offer.
So you would tell President Trump, don't waste your time with this?
Definitely.
That would be your advice?
Definitely.
Okay, so that would be her advice. She's very definite about that. And she is also a member of the home party of Naftali Bennett, mainly representing the settler interest in Israel. Another speaker at the conference in New York City on Wednesday was Caroline Glick. I'm just going to play a couple of clips of her. I want you to sort of look at the reaction. Now look, this is just because they come to a diplomatic conference put on by Jerusalem Post doesn't mean they're all supporters of Israel. In fact, I need to bring out the clip of Caroline Glick from a couple of years ago at the diplomatic conference about where a European minister said something that something to the effect that, well, you Jews just need to learn that, we understand things better in Europe. And if you recall that, it was sort of like he said that, and Caroline looked, well, I'll have to show you the video, because it was sort of like she had radar lock and then she fired. I mean, she locked onto the target. It was quite It was really a lot of fun to watch. So here's her talk, and just listen to how the reaction of the audience is when she's introduced. Now, I think she would get more applause here at our small church than she did there.
It's now my pleasure to introduce Caroline Glick, my esteemed colleague and friend who is a senior contributing editor at the Jerusalem Post, and without question, our most popular columnist. Caroline?
That's what I would call a smattering of applause. So she talked a little bit about Macron and his comments about nationalism. Remember when he took an armistice day on November 11th, 2 weeks ago, on the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I, he took on Trump over nationalism. And here's just a few of her comments.
I was really struck by on November 11th. We had the 100th anniversary of the armistice in Europe at the end of World War I, and in front of 100 world leaders, including the President of the United States, French President Emmanuel Macron delivered a diatribe against nationalism. And this, of course, was 2 weeks after President Trump had identified himself as a nationalist. So it was an extraordinary diplomatic incident. But I think that more importantly than its rudeness, I think that there's something here that we really have to think about when we think about Macron's assault on nationalism. We've been hearing European leaders talk about the evils of nationalism for quite some time, and we never really think about it. And I think the time has come for us to think about what this means. Because the essential claim at the root of the European political condemnation of nationalism is a claim. And the claim is that it was German nationalism that caused World War II and the Holocaust. This is a lie, right? It's a lie. World War II was caused by German imperialism, and the Holocaust was caused by German anti-Semitism. It's not caused by German nationalism. World War II was ended, and the Holocaust was ended when a nationalist country that was not anti-Semitic defeated the Germans, that is, the United States. Yeah. Over the years, when we hear discussions inside of Europe attacking nationalism, what we're actually hearing is something else. We're hearing European leaders and diplomats trying to hide certain aspects of European history, both with regards to World War II, where you had lots of European governments who were collaborating actively and happily with the Germans. That has to do with two things. One is the history of European imperialism, and the other one is the millennial history of European anti-Semitism, including during the Holocaust. Rather than contend with these facts, 2 millennium of European anti-Semitism and European imperialism, we hear them attacking nationalism, which had nothing to do with either World War II or the Holocaust. Until the Europeans are capable of dealing with the reality of their past and the reality of their present, which in both cases were imbued with anti-Semitism, it's going to be very difficult as a practical matter for Israelis to take them seriously as either people who are interested in advancing the cause of peace or championing the cause of international law in world affairs. We would obviously all hope that there would be a reconsideration among the EU, but one of the interesting things that we found is that the more nationalist EU governments are, the less willing they are to engage in this kind of whitewashing of anti-Semitism, either of the past or of the present. So we're very encouraged by this rise of nationalist forces in Europe, which are inherently not anti-Semitic and not imperialist. And we look for the day when we can join forces with Europeans as allies and as friends. But so long as there's no serious reckoning with the past, and there's no effective confrontation with the present, that remains a pipe dream. Thank you.
Well, that was interesting. And by the way, you noticed this when we were in England, that there was, when we were out sort of in the country, in the Midlands, when we were told the guy at Border Control, where are we going? We're going up to Derby to the Midlands. And he goes, oh, why would you want to go up there? They speak so funny up there. And then I asked him about his favorite football team, and I couldn't understand a word he said. And I asked him what we should do while we're here, and he said, go to a pub, go to the pub. And I guess that's what he liked to do. So, but he talked funny too, as far as I'm concerned. And like I said, when he got into a conversation, I literally could not understand a word he said when he started talking about the English football league. But there was a sense of, among the people that I met, that up in the country outside of London, people are much more nationalistic than they are in London. London is a global city. On the cable, we had 50 channels on the TV in the hotel, the Marriott Hotel we stayed in London. Eight of them were Arabic language stations. When you walked around within, I would say, 1 or 2 blocks of the hotel we stayed in, which was not too far from Hyde Park, Marble Arch, there were half a dozen Lebanese restaurants, half a dozen Turkish restaurants, Iranian, Persian, Afghan, Iraqi, Pakistani. There was no pizza. We had to take a cab to get pizza. So, but it's a heavily Middle Eastern part of London. But as you go around London, at breakfast the first morning, we heard at least 7 languages being spoken within range, different languages being spoken within range of our table. So it's a very internationalist city, a globalist city. This is an American company, Airbnb. This is essentially what I would call an electronic crystal knock. Do you remember what crystal knock was? The 80th anniversary of the German crystal knock, the night of broken glass, was just a week or 2 ago. In 1938, German soldiers and others attacked Jewish businesses all across Germany. They broke windows. That's why they call it the night of broken glass. People were rounded up in essentially the first big roundup, I believe, to take them off to the concentration camps, and the Holocaust was underway. And now you have an American company, Airbnb, and you can decide whether you want to do business with Airbnb, but what Airbnb has done, of all the places in the world, they have removed listings from their rental service. You can rent an apartment or a house or a condo or whatever through them. They've removed Jewish-owned homes in the areas of Judea and Samaria and the West Bank because, quote, they are disputed lands. Only Jewish homes. That's why I call it an electronic crystal knock. This is how these things start, very subtly. And the word I've seen from articles I've read is this was a subject of quite a bit of debate. They wanted to include, I believe the subject came up at Airbnb about including Arab neighborhoods in East Jerusalem, but those were not part of the Airbnb ban. They also excluded the Golan Heights. But in Judea and Samaria, Judea and Samaria, the biblical heartland, they removed Jewish home listings, Jewish-owned homes from their listings. They've not done this with any other. Are there other places on the planet right now where there are disputed lands? Airbnb has not removed a single one of those listings. You can draw your own conclusion whether that's anti-Semitic or not. I think it's pretty clear. Here's what Airbnb said. We concluded that we should remove listing in Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank that are at the core of the dispute between the Israelis and Palestinians. Our hope is that someday, sooner rather than later, a framework is put in place where the entire global community is aligned so there will be a resolution to this historic conflict and a clear path forward for everybody to follow. Israeli Tourism Minister Yariv Levin called Airbnb's move the most wretched of wretched capitulations to the boycott efforts. And someone suggested that Airbnb should change its name to AirBDS to represent boycott, divest, and sanction, the movement that does this. In France, Caroline had mentioned Emmanuel Macron. They put in a new fuel tax and they had riots. And this is pictures of the Champs-Élysées in Paris yesterday. Riots, the people in the green jackets are the protesters over this. At the same time this is going on, Theresa May has come back. The European Parliament, the EU has approved Brexit, at least what Theresa May has negotiated, but her government hangs by a thread. Here's Macron, he has about a 29%, that's the highest I've seen him in the polls recently, approval rating. And everybody says, oh, President Trump only has like 50% approval rating. Well, Emmanuel Macron, he's so great because he's a globalist, he's against nationalism. Well, he has 29% approval rating in France right now. His government hangs by a thread. Then yesterday, or a few days ago, Wednesday, while the Jerusalem Post diplomatic conference was going on, Angela Merkel gave a speech at the EU Parliament, or in the German Parliament, praising the EU Parliament as the greatest parliament in the world. And she said this. Mrs. Merkel said that the countries who think that they can solve, now remember, Emmanuel Macron's gone after Trump for nationalism, and here comes Angela Merkel. So that countries who think, quote, they can solve everything on their own are simply nationalistic and not patriotic because they think only about themselves. This is, I think her middle name, I said I was going to put up that Angela Orwell Merkel had a speech that she gave. And she said, either you are one of those who believe that they can solve everything on their own and only have to think about themselves. That is nationalism in its purest form. This is not patriotism, because patriotism is if you include others in the German interest and accept win-win situations. If you can analyze that and diagram it and have it make some kind of sense, please feel free to email me. But that's her. And she also came out in support in that speech of the UN Global Compact on Migration. This has been signed on to by most countries of the world, with the exception of a few. Some of the Eastern European countries who have borne the brunt of the migration policies of Angela Merkel and the costs that are associated with that and don't want it. I think I played the Turkish, or not the Hungarian minister who said, we like our country. You know, we let immigrants in, but we decide. You don't get to decide who we let into our country. And we have Christian values that we want to protect because we like that. But to the Angela Merkels, the globalists, Macron, Merkel, I would include Theresa May in that thing, they're all on board with this global compact on migration. Exceptions are the Eastern European countries. Australia just came out and said they're not going to sign on to it. The USA and Israel. Because they understand the dangers of what these people, what these globalists want to accomplish through this compact on migration. There was also a big conference in Tehran yesterday. An organization of Islamic unity met. Representatives came from a lot of different countries, and we often have heard this claim that Rouhani he's a moderate, he's not the same, but he gave a speech yesterday, the Iranian president, the moderate Islamist president of Iran, which Obama, John Kerry, John Brennan all told us we should make an agreement with this person. And he came out and said, Israel is a cancerous tumor established by the West and should be gotten rid of. The moderate. By the way, this is Iranian, but the graphics you see, this is the Press TV, which is the Iranian English version of Iranian news. Rouhani calls Israel cancerous tumor. I didn't make that up. That's their translation of their own government. And this is a government-sponsored thing in Iran. There was also a report when we're going back to the Gaza situation. CBS News came out and reported that the Gaza rockets were aimed at Israeli military targets. And people like Dexter Van Zyl and the organization that he works, camera.org, CAMERA.org, it stands for Committee for Accuracy and Middle East Reporting in America. And I know Dexter, he's a very dogged journalist, investigator. He does superb work. Make camera.org one of the places you stop at on the internet and follow Dexter. He's on Twitter, Dexter Van Zyl. He came out and said, wait a minute, that's not true. You know, they had pictures of these rockets hitting houses and civilians. There was a school or an apartment building hit. A Palestinian Arab was killed by one of these rocket attacks. And so CBS actually came out, and of course this led to Lieberman resigning because he didn't like the way the situation was responded to. And based on the work of Camera and Dexter Van Zyl and some others there, this is what CBS News actually came out and said this. We got it wrong, and here's what she said.
In a report on November 14th, we said that Palestinians had fired hundreds of rockets at Israel's military. In fact, the rockets were fired into Israel, including several cities and civilian targets.
So, great that happened. There's a couple things I want to discuss. My wife's sitting back there. I can't see her, but I know she's chuckling because I said I don't think I'm going to even make it till noon today, which means that I may speak prophetically and I speak about prophecy, but I'm not a prophet because I thought I would be done, and I still have some things to go. I'm going to just show a brief clip of this. This is Israel Katz. He is the Minister of Transportation and Intelligence and one of the security cabinet members in Israel, speaking at the at the Jerusalem Post Diplomatic Conference Wednesday in New York. He's going to play a video. I just want you to look at the first part of the video and the title of what it's about. It's about a project that he and Prime Minister Netanyahu have been working on. And I think this, we'll have to wait and see, but I think this has some implications for Bible prophecy. So just watch a couple minutes of this.
The Iranian nuclear threat is the biggest threat of Israel. As for the region, there is progress, as could be seen in the recent visits of Prime Minister Netanyahu and myself to Oman. In between regional security and intelligence cooperation, which already exists, and the prospect of future regional peace, we are advancing regional cooperation in various civilian areas, from commercial aviation to the Trucks for Regional Peace initiative. I would like to show you a short movie about the Trucks for Regional Peace initiative, and as I said before, one picture shows more than 1,000 words. So please.
Tracks for Regional Peace, the Regional Land Bridge and Hub Initiative. The Regional Land Bridge and Hub Initiative is a groundbreaking rail transport initiative connecting the Mediterranean and the Persian Gulf. The initiative is based on two central ideas: Israel as a land bridge and Jordan as a regional transportation hub. A regional rail network would be used to transport cargo and, in the future, people as well, between the U.S., Europe, and the Mediterranean in the west, and Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states in the east. The initiative will create regional trade routes that are shorter, faster, cheaper, and safer, and contribute to the economies of Jordan, the Palestinian Authority, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, and in the future, Iraq as well. It will also increase the activity in Israel's ports and energize Israel's economy. Railway infrastructure, which already exists in Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf, will allow the initiative to be implemented in a relatively short time. The Valley train line, based on the historic Hijaz Railway connecting Haifa with Bet Shean, was reopened in 2016. The line will be extended eastward to the Sheikh Hussein border crossing with Jordan and southward to the Jalami crossing in the Jenin area, where the Palestinians will also be able to connect to it, going west as well as east to Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf, stimulating economic growth and employment in the Palestinian Authority. A large, modern inland port would be built in Jordan to handle regional trade, providing value-added services and contributing significantly to the Jordanian economy. The Saudi railway system already includes a north-south line which connects the Jordanian-Saudi border with the Persian Gulf. The forecasted growth in regional trade is expected to make the initiative profitable within a decade. The main causes for the expected growth in regional trade include the forecasts for renewed rapid economic growth, development of new export sectors in Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, and the reconstruction of the Iraqi economy. The potential trade flows via the land bridge are expected to reach $250 billion by the year 2030, 4 times the current value of the trade handled by Israeli ports. Trade traffic via the Overland Route Railway will also bypass the security threats emanating from Iran in the Straits of Hormuz and the Bab al-Mandab. From a strategic viewpoint, the initiative could strengthen the region's pragmatic camp. Public and private sector collaboration is essential for realizing this initiative, which will change the region, strengthen economies, contribute to stability, and promote peace. The Tracks for Regional Peace initiative is necessary, desirable, and possible.
Well, that's interesting. Everybody's talking about peace, and they're trying to achieve it in a number of ways, and they're involving a lot of the Arab states in this. You need to watch for the development of, Trump has called it Arab NATO, and as part of his analysis. So you need to keep an eye on it. There was also a meeting this week put on by the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, jcpa.org. And Seth Fransman has a great article in this morning's Jerusalem Post about this. And the title of the article is, it's new enough that I didn't even have time to make up a slide of it, Israelis, Arabs, and Kurds discuss a Middle East confederation in Jerusalem. This is the Arab NATO thing. A group of nations coming together. So look, we have the EU trying to hold itself together. We have these people coming together. These regional parts of the world are sort of coming together. And we don't know yet exactly how this big final beast empire configuration of 10 nations take place. Some centered in Europe, some centered in the Middle East, some think it's more global, 10 regions. So it's interesting in Europe right now. It could be a 10 nation. They talk about a 10 nation defense confederacy. And now you have 3 nations that are sort of teetering on the brink with their governments: Germany, England, or Great Britain, UK, and France. And those governments could fail. And could a little horn rise up in that environment to try to bring things back together? Yeah, that's possible. I'm not discounting that possibility. But there's also this regional thing coming together in the Middle East. And it involves 7, 8, or 9, or 10 nations as well. An Omani minister came out. Oman, this is where Netanyahu went recently. Omani minister came out and said, not the king of Oman, but one of his ministers said, Israel is a fact of life in the Middle East now. This has huge implications for how we've been viewing geopolitics, especially through the lens of Bible prophecy. So let me just read 2 paragraphs from Seth. I'll have a couple more comments, things to refer you to, and then we'll be out of here right at whatever time we finish. So this is what these are quotes from the conference. Israel should not be afraid of a confederation of Iraq and Syria as a counterweight to a more assertive Turkey and Iran. That's one quote. Next quote. The Middle East is at a crossroads and is worth considering new approaches in the region. Another quote. A confederation involving Iraq, Syria, or even Jordan and Israel might harness the unique qualities of each while giving space for all the different groups and their agendas to be heard. These were some of the ideas that emerged from a unique event last week at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, where a group of Israeli, Arab, and Kurdish speakers, some speaking via Skype from abroad, discussed the current state of the Middle East and its future. Quote, these kinds of meetings are of great importance to gather Israeli experts and former diplomats together to create a common understanding, said Craig Sandick, coordinator of the Kurdish Studies programs at the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle East and African Studies. So this is something that should be of interest from a prophetic perspective. The meeting was a closed-door session, and some of the participants did not want to be identified because they are from Middle Eastern countries that do not have relations with Israel. The main point many of them wanted to get across is that it is important to meet with Israelis and for both sides to share their views. So you might look up Seth Frantzman's article in this morning's Jerusalem Post titled Israelis, Arabs, and Kurds discuss the Middle East Confederation in Jerusalem. A couple articles that you should look up, or columns that you should look up, is Caroline Glick's column on Friday in Jerusalem Post, Hamas and Fatah Unmasked. I think it's, as usual, it's a very good analysis. Also in Friday's Jerusalem Post is Melanie Phillips' latest column. She just had some speaking engagements in the United States. Israel shows the West the real source of national resilience. It's a very well done article, as you would expect from Melanie Phillips. So you might look those up. I'm not going to go into those. Both of them, just suffice it to say, would be the counterweight and the opposite of Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron. And I think their analysis is spot on. Another article that came out, a good article to review at Ynet, is Iran's great nuclear deception. And what they do is they've gone back and they've added some additional information. Remember back in April when Prime Minister Netanyahu unveiled the fact that Israeli agents had broken into the atomic archive of Iran. And they had picked up all of the plans, the secrets, 185 computer CDs and DVDs, notebooks with tens of thousands of pages in them documenting how Iran was deceptive to all the international agencies. The Iran that now today says that Israel is a cancerous tumor that needs, essentially, what do you do with a cancerous tumor? You remove it or you kill it. And that's what Iran wants to do. And Iran had plans for up to 5 nuclear weapons that they were planning to put on ballistic missiles. And don't forget about the situation in Syria. We haven't heard news of any Israeli airstrikes. There's reports in the news this morning of 100 people being injured in a chemical attack in Aleppo. And I will give you my opinion as to who caused it right now, as I have no clue. I note that the Russians and the Syrians and the Iranians come out and they say, there's going to be a chemical attack, there's going to be a chemical attack, there's going to be a chemical attack. And it's going to happen by these people, by these people, by these people. Then why don't you go stop it? I mean, really. So somebody's engaging in propaganda. That is clear. So I know people, oh, that's Israel and the United States. They're doing this. Israel wants to take over the entire Middle East. So I don't see that as an Israeli desire. But suffice it to say, Netanyahu sent a message to Lebanon and said, the people in charge of the Lebanese government, and said, listen, we know there are Iranian military bases being there. If you don't put a stop to it, we will. It was just a little over a year ago that the head of the Israeli Air Force said that if we have to go into Lebanon the next time, it will be shock and awe like you've never seen. So look, this is the mountains of Israel. This is Bible prophecy. These are things being set up to be fulfilled. Could be fulfilled in very short order. So pay attention to the news. And look, always use this as a motivation to go out and share the gospel with people. I was so encouraged by some of the people we met in England at the conference. There was a whole row of young people there in their 20s. And they said that, and if I have the numbers wrong, I apologize. I'm sure they can send me an email. They said, we get together in a group of about 20 every Sunday night and watch your prophecy update and Pastor Steve Mitchell and the messages at your church up in the Midlands area of England. And it was very encouraging. It was great to see young people there, young people who love the Word of God, who love Jesus, and want to share the gospel with their friends. They know that the only hope for the world is the gospel of Jesus Christ and the return of the King. That the only thing that gets you saved is believing that Jesus Christ died on the cross for your sins. That is the only way of salvation. I was very encouraged. They also said, by the way, there might be 20 of us, but you only get one view out of that, so on YouTube. But pray for those fellow believers. I have a friend who witnesses to people in the Kurdish regions of Iraq and Syria, and they are under severe persecution. One of them received a threat that he would be killed because of his faith in Jesus Christ. And those people have a faith that really puts us to shame. Would that we all had and will have faith that strong. So let's pray. Father, thank you so much for letting us know about these things, Lord. I just pray that you'll use this as motivation not to know exactly what's going on, but that it'll be motivation for us to go out and be a witness for the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ. In Jesus' name, amen.